Hello, world, and welcome back to week 9 already of Roto-World's DFS Building Block Show. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined by friend in life, Hayden Winks, and this week's rotating guest, none other than someone I am personally a big fan of, Draft Shark's own Jared Smola. Jared, how's it going? And thank you for joining the show with us.
Thanks for having me, guys. This is my Roto-World debut, so pretty exciting there. It's Friday night now, so I think, most of the work for the week is behind us. Nice to do a DFS podcast, stream too, where we have like 95% of the info versus, doing something on Wednesday or Thursday where we have no idea about these injury situations.
This was admittedly pitched to us to go on Thursday afternoons this year, and Hayden and I both nixed that very quickly, right. Which I'm glad, because we didn't expect. We knew injuries, and it'd be a different year altogether, but this many injuries and like this many pivots, so to come on literally after the final injury report is always a breath of fresh air. Other than that, though, how's your season been going on for you over there at Draft Sharks and in DFS in general?
Going well, yeah. I'm definitely more of a cash game guy. I don't have the imagination, I guess, to put together the tournament winning lineups, but I've done well in cash. I've won it in 6 of the 8 weeks, and then as usual, I've had some min cashes here or there, but nothing big.
We'll try to talk a lot of everything on this show. I will quickly say, before I get Hayden's take from last week, that I had come on this show like the past 7-8 weeks and just said, I know I'm nearly there. I got the ancillary options ready to go. I've been smart on my pivots. It's just like the quarterback in the stack has just always been one off from the winning tournament lineup. Last week, I nailed it. I had Mahomes double stacked with Demarcus Robinson. I got off the cheap Jets receiver, instead went to the cheap Chiefs receiver. Also had who were some of the big running backs last week? Was it like Derrick Henry? Dalvin Cook. Like, I had it all in a row. I go to check because I usually enter all the mid-stake tournaments on DraftKings, and rather than taking all the spies, I accidentally put my bankroll into the 10-cent tournaments. And so came out positive ROI, but the number was about 4 digits off than what it should have been. So nonetheless, we are back. Hayden, how did your week 8 go?
Mahomes was my highest owned player outside of the running back. So I had a good week. I'm basically only playing Yahoo for tournaments right now. I love their setup over there. And you basically just play the cheaper running backs and then find the right stack. So I finished 13th out of like 15K. I like 6 out of my 10 lineups were in top 100s. And I've had a couple of weeks like that, have not come away winning any of these like first place yet, but I think the process is there. I think Mahomes was the right pick last week.
And we talked about that to close the show. Fortunately, I came away with 10x ROI, which was $1 exactly. So hopefully we can hit more this week and help everyone out. As always, we will be taking your questions about the entire main slate, DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo, whatever the hell you want to talk about throughout the show. No start sits. That's my favorite part of the week. No start sits at all. Strictly DFS. We have smart guests on, so we like to pivot around the main slate for week 9. And with that, as everyone knows, we like to start with the decision point. The one problem or issue, or perhaps just question we want to ask the others that we've come across whenever we've been building our lineups this week. So, Jared, you're the guest. Go ahead and tell us what your decision point has been when building lineups this week.
Yeah, so mine is which and how many expensive wide receivers to play. And this would be more of a cash thing, because personally in cash, I hate paying up for wide receivers in cash. I feel like every time I do it, I just get a dud, because even these stud wide receivers are much more volatile than the stud running backs. But this week, I think you want, again, at least one expensive wide receiver, maybe 2, but then it's figuring out which ones to play. So you have Julio Jones, $7,200 on DraftKings. If Calvin Ridley's out, he is, I think, the best target bet on the slate. At home against a Broncos secondary that's going to be missing A.J. Bouye. So Julio's in a great spot. Keenan Allen, I think, is definitely in play. His price finally up to $7,000 on DraftKings. Still more than a fair price for the type of volume he's been getting with Justin Herbert. Tyler Lockett, I'm like scared to have a lineup without Tyler Lockett in it, because we've seen the type of upside he has this season. We know the Bills are a slot, funnel defense, so it really should be a Lockett game. And then the fourth guy I'm considering, most expensive of the 4, Stephon Diggs. I mean, he leads all wide receivers in targets, third among wide receivers in air yards, gets the league worst Seattle wide receiver defense. So again, I think you want at least one of those guys in your lineups, possibly 2, depending on what you're spending elsewhere at the other positions.
So, Hayden, let's get this party started early and get the hot questions out of the way. Among the receivers Jared just mentioned, Julio, Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, Tyler Lockett, who would you fade among that group?
Man, possibly Steph Diggs. I'm guessing that ownership's going to end up funneling towards Seattle, Buffalo. I really like Stephon Diggs, though. I think that Keenan Allen is like probably the best cash play out of that group because the Raiders secondary is still not very good. We've seen him get peppered with targets. The Chargers' neutral pass rate is now top 5 after being bottom 5 for most of the season. So I think that he would be definitely in the mix, and I'm not going to fade Julio Jones or Tyler Lockett too often. So I think by default it would be Steph Diggs, but I think Steph Diggs is a great play, and I am certainly going to have some tournament exposure to him.
I know you have it up on your end. You usually keep it up throughout the show, Hayden. So what does ownership projections look like on Keenan Allen? Because why I like him so much for tournaments anyways, and I'm glad we have Jared on the show talking cash games this week for everyone, is because he falls in that unknown zone. Like everyone's going to look up to Julio Jones, or perhaps if Calvin Ridley's active, they're going to look up only $200 more on DraftKings just to Stephon Diggs. And those are the two guys who are going to pop. But you go down just another $200 at $7K, and that's Keenan Allen. So to me, it seems like he would be overlooked, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, he's going to be like somewhere like 20%-25%. I think
overlooked.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm noticing with this, and this was going to be my decision point kind of question is, I think the last couple of weeks there's been some very obvious plays, and you've seen some players get projected for 30 to 40, maybe even higher in some of the higher stakes tournaments. I don't think that the ownership's going to get completely out of whack on many players. I don't think that there's very like completely obvious stacks as well, because even the best stacks, the Seattle guys, Kansas City, they've been priced up. And same thing with the running backs. They're like, we're not getting the cheap pivots running back that's going to be at 35%. So I think that this week you're going to see a lot of more flattened ownership, and then it kind of gets curious. There's not like a must fade player in my opinion, because I don't think that any of these guys are going to be like more than 35%. I think probably the top guy is probably Dalvin Cook, just because he's been balling out. The matchup's perfect, and the Vikings team total's high. So I think that he's probably going to be the highest owned guy on the slate.
I would think the cheap pivot we may get is Tony Pollard, since Zeke is questionable and the Cowboys bye is in week 10. So it makes sense for them to hold him out. I really don't know at this time, because I don't even know if I consider Pollard a free square. I assume he's minimum, right? I think he's minimum.
Yeah, it's 4K.
Okay, yeah, across sites. And I don't even know if he's a free square against the Steelers front seven, to be honest. Like, he's no J.K. Dobbins who can go out and average 7.5 yards per touch. So I don't know what I would do in that situation. DJ Dallas, in my opinion, is kind of the best value at 5K right now. Of course, Travis Homer could eat into his workload now that he's a week extra fully healthy, but I still think DJ Dallas would command that backfield, and he will be overlooked since everyone would try to get onto Lockett and DK Metcalf in that game as the more expensive options. Jared, do you have any opinions like on cheap options here?
So I actually wanted to ask you guys this, because this is like my other thing. I'm wondering, it's probably for my flex spot in my cash lineup. DJ Dallas for 5,000 on DraftKings, or Justin Jackson for 4,900. Tremaine Pope is doubtful for the Chargers, so we don't have to worry about him. Mm-hmm. It's back to a two-man backfield with Jackson and Joshua Kelly. Seattle is expected to promote Alex Collins from their practice squad. I don't know what he's going to do. It just adds another body to that backfield. I kind of doubt Dallas is going to get as big a workload as he did last week. I think Travis Homer is probably a bit healthier. Collins added to the mix. So do you guys have a strong lean, DJ Dallas or Justin Jackson?
Well, the frustrating thing for me is that Travis Homer would probably play in the passing down role. And like, that's what I want from Dallas, honestly. So I could see myself getting off them. Also, I think, and this goes to my decision point, by the way, is that I think there are a bunch of clear, unique pivots in that game to make sure we still have exposure towards that game. And because if I don't go Dallas, I would probably go Will Dissly, honestly. He's $2,700. He's $400 cheaper than Greg Olsen. And last week, obviously outsnapped him, but Seattle also has played the most plays from 12 personnel the past 2 weeks now. So I assume he's going to be on a field against a Bills defense that's allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So I kind of like Tyler Lockett and Dissly as a double stack with Russ if I'm not going DJ Dallas. So that's kind of that's where I'm at with my cheap pivots here.
Yeah, I think with the Seattle guys, I think it's very tough for both Metcalf and Lockett to pay off. So I think that you want to pick one of them and maybe just only single stack it with Russ, or maybe find another cheap guy. I think when it's just Jackson versus Dallas, I think that Dallas has the much higher ceiling. I don't think that if Jackson's not getting the goal line work and if we're seeing the Chargers pass the ball more, that I don't really see a path unless he breaks a long random touchdown for like 20 DraftKings points. I think that Dallas that's very reasonable if he does have that thing, like the full 3-down workload. I don't think that his floor is very high because we don't know how the touches are going to get broken out. If I had to guess, I think that he probably plays 70% of the snaps, is like a mini bell cow, and I think that he would probably pay off. I think that in cash games, you have to like really consider the floor that you're getting with him. But I think that out of all of the cheaper running backs, he definitely has the highest ceiling. I mean, just look at last week, he went off.
And to Ganja's point, because it goes into my decision point about the cheap pivots, I like John Brown a lot too. I like John Brown for as much as you can like a receiver who has 69 yards since week 3. Like that's all I could say. He did mirror Stephon Diggs in routes last week, 21 on Josh Allen's 22 dropbacks. So clearly at full health, against a team, as we know, is allowing 4 more fantasy points per game to opposing wideouts than the next closest defense, the Falcons. So I do like John Brown as a cheap leap of faith over Stephon Diggs and tournaments. But again, like these are just cheap options, and that's probably where I'll go. But right now, that's where I'm at. Do you have any? I don't know if it's just that game, Jared. Like, do you have a cheap pivot in that game? Maybe one in general from another stack you've been thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I love that Bills Seahawks game, but it seems like it's just going to be so chalky. So I think you don't need a pivot from that game. If you're just building a stack there, you need to get some lower owned guys, even from other games in those lineups. And you don't want to build a Bills Seahawks stack with chalk guys everywhere else. So, what do you guys have ownership wise for John Brown versus Cole Beasley? Because I think Beasley is more expensive than John Brown on DraftKings. I would assume he's going to be less owned among the two. And now Seattle's given up some big games to slot receivers. Beasley's actually shown like a decent ceiling this season even. So I think Beasley might be a better tournament play than John Brown, even though we think about Brown as, the guy with the higher upside.
I think Beasley is one of those pay up to be contrarian, and I think that his ownership will be lower, probably significantly lower. And I think that when you're dealing with these slot receivers that everyone thinks are slow and dusty, I mean, sometimes they pop. I mean, last year, Cole Beasley was scoring a bunch of touchdowns, and if this game is going to go nuclear, if Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf is going to pay up, you're going to need one of these guys to hit. And I think that if you go Russ, Lockett, Stephon Diggs, I mean, you're competing with, that's probably like 10%, maybe 5% of all of the DraftKings tournaments entries. So you're going to have to get really unique in the rest of your builds. So I think maybe sprinkling in Beasley or John Brown on top of that, going down to Disley, I think you're going to have to either add one more element to this game to get different or go way off the board with the rest of your stacks. Because I think that combination of either Russ or Josh Allen, Steph Diggs, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, everyone's going to go that route. So you're going to have to get really funky with the rest of your builds.
And I never usually hone into the highest total of the week. I like to sprinkle pieces, of course, but I do know the reason it increased from 53 to 55 and continues getting bet over is because of a few sharp betting syndicates. Like, it's not public money. It's actually sharp money that's coming in on the over because it's supposed to be amazing weather in Buffalo as well. So yeah, I just like the game, as everyone does, but I like just trying to find a way to get unique around this game as well. And perhaps even double stacking both sides, one side without the quarterback, obviously. But with that, as we always do, we're going to jump in here to the Roto-Roll Toolkit, build a lineup as Jared leads us off with his highest exposure on the week, despite ownership.
Yeah, I'm locking in Chase Edmonds. I think he's $6,700 both on DraftKings and FanDuel. I think he's the top value running back on both sides. I mean, you're going to have two rookies behind him on the depth chart. Benjamin, Jonathan Ward, I'm guessing will be active. He's an undrafted rookie. Benjamin was a 7th-round rookie. I think Chase Edmonds is going to get close to 100% of Arizona's running back touches in this game. He's already averaging 4.6 targets per game, so I think you can project him somewhere around there on Sunday. And I think you can project him for somewhere around the 17 carries per game that Kenyon Drake was getting. So I think you're going to get over 20 touches from Chase Edmonds here. In Miami, they're an underrated pass defense, but they're still dead last in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA. They're allowing 5 yards per carry through running backs. They're 23rd in adjusted fantasy points allowed through running backs. So I think Edmonds Cash tournaments, I'm going to have him in probably 100% of my lineups.
I agree. Chase Edmonds is my number one drafted best ball player for hoping for these type of weeks to happen. I think that he's going to run away with, probably 14 to 16 carries, 6-7 targets, and all the high value touches. Arizona's pacing up. I think that they can even be better without Drake. I think they're probably going to pass more. I think that will keep them sustaining drives even more so. So I think that Chase Edmonds is a smash too.
And this week, by the way, dfs.rotoworld.com, I am going to make optimal lineups. That way I can shove in all of our high ownership plays as well as our large tournament plays. And then we'll just optimize lineups and see what we like here throughout the show. But Hayden, what about your player you are going to be overexposed to?
Yeah, I'll chase Dalvin Cook. You're basically deciding between if McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, those are the top three running backs. And I like Dalvin Cook by far the most. The Lions obviously cannot stop the run. Whenever the Vikings get out in front, they're going to really run the ball. He looks awesome. He didn't look hampered by his injury at all. So I think Dalvin Cook just makes too much sense. I think that last year, DraftKings was pricing somebody with Dalvin Cook's workload probably closer to 9,000, maybe even a little higher. This isn't exactly the Christian McCaffrey role because he doesn't get that many targets, but he makes up for it with just awesome running. And I think that the Vikings, are the third or fourth highest projected team on the slate. And there's only 3 guys that are scoring touchdowns over there. And I think Dalvin Cook's the favorite among those 3.
Any thoughts on that game in general, Jared?
Yeah, I think Minnesota wins it pretty easily. I kind of like the under in that game. They're 2 slower paced offenses. Both teams want to run as much as possible. I think Minnesota will be able to. Detroit will probably have to throw a bit more than they want to, but it's not a game I'm overly interested in. I do like Dalvin Cook as a cash play. No issue with him in tournaments. The other guy I like from that game is Justin Jefferson. Just if you're trying to get different, Cook's going to be so highly owned that, maybe pivoting to Jefferson, who obviously has shown us the upside this season already. He's basically getting the same usage as Adam Thielen. He's like 3 targets behind, and you're basically even in air yards since Jefferson took over full-time role like 5 games ago. So those are kind of the only 2 guys I'm interested in that game.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't think the pivot from Dalvin Cook, if you don't play him in tournaments in general, is Derrick Henry, even though he's $300 cheaper. I think the pivot is paying up for wide receivers and then going cheap at running back. So you just have to keep that in mind because also perhaps if it seems like Cook is coming in at not as high of ownership in tournaments as he should be, then maybe that's the plan for everyone as well. So just something to keep in mind. Although in a bit here, I'll talk about players, some cheap running backs, not only just Justin Jackson, who I do like. And I also, my immediate thought whenever Troy Maine Pope was rolled out, I was like, oh, like Josh Kelly ran more routes than Justin Jackson a couple weeks ago, or ran as many, like maybe Josh Kelly back in our lives as well. So I think both of those are cheap options, but yeah, just something to keep in mind that pivoting does not mean getting off Dalvin Cook for the next highest option at running back. It can mean then paying up, as you're seeing in the kit, this plethora of wide receivers, because that's been my issue all week in building lineups. There are just so many receivers I want to pay up for. So it's a matter of just getting them all right. And mine, of course, leads me into Julio Jones, who I'm locking in. Now, I will say, if Calvin Ridley surprisingly plays, I won't be off Julio Jones entirely, but I will be getting off. But just the fact, last year, 3 games without Calvin Ridley, 2015, 13 targets. I know we saw this offense tank without Julio Jones, but Julio Jones is still the superior talent to Calvin Ridley, although Ridley was coming into his own. So I don't think they tank, especially against a struggling Broncos defense I consider overrated already, and A.J. Bouye just got ruled out for the game. So I kind of like the over in that game because I think the Broncos can answer, but more importantly, I don't think Julio can fail. And as you had mentioned earlier in the show, Smola, I think he's the best price point on the entire slate because he should be priced as Devontae Adams if Calvin Ridley's out, and he's not. I think he's like $1,600 too cheap, honestly.
Yeah, Julio smashes all the time. You're not going to hear any disagreements from me on that one. Yeah, I'm curious what the optimizer spits out because we all just picked guys that are 6,800 or above. So I'm curious to see what cheap guys they're going to go to.
Let's go ahead and mix in. Let's start with you, Hayden. Then let's go to our large entry tournament darts, and then we'll mix in 3 more guys. Don't have to be cheapies. We'll mix in 3 guys, and then we'll see what it shoots out.
Do you want me to pick my guy in the 600s or 6,000s or the 3,000s?
Let's get some 3Ks here.
All right. I don't love this call, but I'm going to go with Marvin Hall, who's been kind of a deep threat option as somebody with a little more speed. I don't think that Quintez Cephas is going to get back into the starting lineup, and I think that the price point makes some sense, especially if we're going to be including Dalvin Cook in here already. You're getting some type of correlation. So I like him the best out of the guys with under 4,000 among the receivers.
I will say my only concern with Marvin Hall or Cephas is that I do worry the Lions offense just craters here. And that would also lend itself to Jared's prediction that this game goes under. I think the Vikings could just run away with it. Because remember, Stafford, first 2 games without Golladay, this was not the same offense, 7.3 yards per attempt. And now Stafford, I think he plays, honestly. But even if he does, I just don't know what they will be. And thus, I would probably get away from everyone entirely, or sprinkle in Marvin Jones. I don't think I'd go down to Hall personally.
Yeah, this is definitely assuming Stafford is cleared to play, which I think he is going to be ultimately cleared to play.
Chase Daniel, honestly, maybe. I know Ganja asked here about Chase Daniel because he's 4K stone minimum on DraftKings. But even then, like, man, I don't know if it's worth the build in cash games. Like, Jerry, could you see yourself entering all your head-to-heads on Sunday with Chase Daniel?
Yeah, I honestly might for 4K.
Okay.
I think he has some rushing ability still, which helps him. We haven't seen him much lately, but back in the day for Chase Daniel, he could run a little bit. And again, there are just a lot of guys I want to pay up for. I feel like I could jam in, these stud running backs and a couple of these high-priced wide receivers if I use Chase Daniel in cash.
I'll say just Chase Daniel in tournaments, I would get away from that. I think that this year in particular, you're seeing the quarterbacks, unlike we've seen basically any time before, they're putting up monster numbers. So I think that he's not a tournament play.
Yep.
Yeah, Chase Daniel will not come within 20 points of Russ or Josh Allen or Justin Herbert. Like you get away from that in tournaments for sure and find another build. And my large entry tournament dart is actually, let's go to you first, Jared.
I think Mark Andrews is an awesome tournament play. His price is way down. The ownership projections I've seen on him are low. I think people are just sort of sick of Mark Andrews, and he's been disappointing this season, but he's still had a few big games. The on paper matchup isn't that deal against the Colts. They've been a tough tight end defense, but they just gave up 7 catches to TJ Hawkinson. Mark Andrews always a candidate for, multiple touchdowns. So I think at the price tag and ownership, he's a great tourney play this week.
So we're probably going to have to jam into Lamar here because my large entry tournament play is J.K. Dobbins, who already outsnapped Gus Edwards significantly last week. And I understand Edwards left for a little bit of a time with a knee injury, but just to average 7.5 yards per touch against the Steelers, over 7 yards per carry against the Steelers on 15 carries. And now of course, it's still a tough matchup, but it doesn't get any harder than what J.K. Dobbins just wasted last week. And the Ravens offense, they outgained the Steelers significantly. It was not an issue of the offense not flowing. It was a matter of them just not scoring. So I think it could be a good week. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but I do like Ravens stacks as well. I'm just trying to see if I'm ready to go into tournaments, honestly, with Lamar double stacked and then run it back with, Marcus Johnson or someone instead of going to Josh Allen or Russell Wilson. That's kind of been my conundrum all week.
Daigle, would you be playing Marquise Brown? I still think he's just so expensive. Like he's going to be low owned. There's a squeaky wheel narrative. We've seen some ceiling games out of him, but man, he's just so expensive to get there. I mean, even if he goes 90 yards and a touchdown, I mean, at 6,000, how much are you really moving? I think that Lamar's ceiling is still not completely tied to his legs, but like really tied to his legs. I'm hoping that the game plan is J.K. Dobbins, you get 20 carries, Lamar Jackson, you get 12, and we just go from there.
What are your thoughts on Marquise Brown, Jared?
Yeah, I agree with Hayden. I think he's still too expensive. I think the Colts D too is pretty good at eliminating big plays in the passing game. So, and listen, I'm the last person to fall into the narrative stuff like the squeaky wheel thing. So I'm not going to buy that. I think Brown's going to have more ownership than he should still based on the price tag and the matchup.
So yeah, I went ahead, threw all the 6 guys in there just to see what else it spits out. It comes out with a heavy Deshaun Watson. Hey, do you have a lean on that game anyways? Texans over, or I should say playing the Jaguars?
Yeah, I was going to talk about that game in a little bit for one of our later segments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Deshaun Watson's playing well. You've seen kind of a play calling switch, more play action, and Brandon Cooks looks healthy. He didn't look healthy earlier in the season. Will Fuller's still playing very well, and I think that they're getting a little bit better offensive line play. Just I think the way that they're attacking defenses is a little bit smarter, and of course the Jaguars can't do anything. So I do like Deshaun Watson this week.
It also threw in David Moore as a cheap pivot, and that is not a unique pivot. So I went ahead and deleted him. I also deleted Zeke because he's a bum. And then let's see what else happens here with the lineups. Okay, it's just pretty much just more cheap pivots here. I'd have to go in and delete these 3K guys. I'm not going to worry about that. But basically, it's forcing a lot of Deshaun Watson. So that tells you that clearly the model, at least, is very high on Deshaun Watson. And Watson will come in under-owned because everyone's going to flock to, Russ, Kyler even, Josh Allen, all these other guys.
Yeah, I think the Texans are going to have a good game here.
So let's go ahead and get to our fade, our highest, or the number one player we are fading despite ownership this week. It can be in cash games. It can be in tournaments. It doesn't matter. Just a player we're lower on than consensus. So, Jared, let's start with you.
I was surprised to see how high James Robinson is coming in projected ownership. He's $7,000 over on DraftKings. He's more expensive than Chase Edmonds. He's more expensive than James Conner, who we haven't talked about, but I prefer Conner straight up to James Robinson. I mean, Robinson's been awesome this season, obviously. Matchup was good against Houston. I'm just worried about this offense with Jake Luton's in his first game. The Jags have a 21.5 point implied total. I don't think there's a ton of touchdown upside with James Robinson. Plus, Chris Thompson is back in this game. We saw Robinson get every Jacksonville running back touch last time out with Chris Thompson sideline. I think with Thompson back, he's going to lose some pass catching work. So Robinson's a fine play, but just at the price tag and the ownership, he's someone I would fade in tournaments.
Go ahead and get into it, Hayden. I know you want to wait for the stacks portion, but is it Robinson you would run it back with, or is it LaVisca? Because you clearly want to talk about Deshaun Watson stacks.
Yeah, Deshaun Watson, Will Fuller, and Brandon Cooks. I would go with one of the two, probably not both, because I'm trying to price in some random touchdowns to one of these tight ends. That always happens. Maybe some Randall Cobb production. Deshaun Watson running things into himself. Daigle, you talked about on the podcast, maybe some more Duke Johnson involvement. On the other side, I'm going to DJ Chark, who is coming in at way lower ownership than James Robinson. I'm with you guys. I'm not sure why James Robinson's projected for this much ownership. DJ Chark, the peripherals are there. I mean, we're talking about top 10 in air yards over the last month. He's basically coming in as like a wide receiver 2 in usage just in general over the last month. He's not coming down with it. And of course, that's a quarterback problem that is not being solved. But when you're dealing with deep targets downfield, which is what DJ Chark gets all the time, you only need one of those to hit. And when you're talking about tournaments, we don't care if he goes over 4 on those deep targets. If he goes 1 for 4 on those deep targets, we've seen this type of ceiling that DJ Chark has. And I also think that there is something to when a quarterback that is completely inexperienced comes in, he's going to throw the ball to his best playmaker. And right now, as much as I love Laviska Shenault, DJ Chark is still being treated as the one completely polished, full all-around route runner, just a natural receiver in general. So I think that DJ Chark makes a lot of sense with the run backs on the Deshaun Watson stacks. And he's going to come in sub 5% owned because everyone is definitely over DJ Chark, and I hear you.
I see you shaking your head, Smola. What are you thinking about DJ Chark over there?
Yeah, Chark is my stack. I'm definitely going to have a Deshaun Watson team. I might use Cooks and Fuller. If I'm picking between the two, I actually prefer Cooks.
I do too.
He's cheaper. He's actually out-targeted Fuller since Bill O'Brien was fired. I like Chark as the run back. He's just $5,200 on DraftKings, so he's, I think, underpriced and under-owned.
My number one fade. I don't know how high he'll be rostered though. Hayden, look up what is Derrick Henry being rostered at right now, because I think logically if people do get off Dalvin Cook, they will go to Derrick Henry. And he still got there, by the way, in a game where the Titans offense really didn't even show up. Their team total was 29. They failed. They got to 20, wasn't even close. And yet Derrick Henry still got over the century mark with the touchdown as a few of these pieces continue to hit weekly. And oddly enough, I do like the total in that game. And although the Bears have yet to allow QB1 performance on the year, I still like Ryan Tannehill in the passing game more so than Derrick Henry. Of course, they could get on the goal line. He could punch in a couple scores and still screw me over here. But I just think everyone will look to pay up at that position if they don't have Dalvin Cook, whereas I don't want to. Instead, like I said, I'm going these hefty receivers that I think could easily outscore them.
Yeah, I think Derrick Henry would probably come in under 10% just because.
Okay. That's not even a lot.
Just because Dalvin Cook is, I think, clearly projected for more points than Derrick Henry, probably by like 4 or 5, maybe even more in PPR formats, especially with the bonus. I think that Dalvin Cook has just as good chance to hit 100 rushing yards as Derrick Henry. So I'm guessing that it would be some people are going to pivot towards him. But I do think that Dalvin Cook probably catches 20% more ownership than Derrick Henry. But I'm with you. I don't like Derrick Henry. Paying $8,000 for Derrick Henry is just, I still can't stomach it.
I don't. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I won't have 100% Dalvin Cook, but like right now as we stand on Friday, I just can't imagine. Let's say like mid-stakes single entries. I can't imagine going into them without Dalvin Cook, especially because like I said, I could be wrong here, but I'm so big on the Vikings just road grading the Lions, and the Lions not even competing whatsoever. And what's funny is that if Stafford's ruled out, the Vikings defense is right there at 2,400. They're going to be the highest owned defense on the entire week, honestly. Whereas like there are some other options we could go to as well. But anyways, Swola, what about some stacks, whether they be unique, off the radar? What matchups in particular are you liking this week?
So we've talked about stacking the Bills Seahawks game. Obviously, that's going to be the chalk, I think. I like the Texans stack. I'm going to go, to go off the board a bit and to get a cheap stack to help us fit in some of these more expensive guys. I like Drew Lock at $5,200. I wouldn't play him in cash games even at the price. I think his floor is just too low. We've seen him struggle a bunch, but he's also, he's coming off a good game against the Chargers. Now he gets Atlanta, who is dead last in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Atlanta's allowed 29 plus DraftKings points in 4 of their 8 games. So I do think Locke has upside for the price. I like stacking him with Noah Fant, who's just $4,600, and Jerry Jeudy, who's just $4,700. I'd run that back with Julio Jones, obviously, for the game stack. And at the prices Locke, Fant, and Jeudy are at, you can fit in a lot of these other higher price studs in that stack.
Cross promotion. I do a Wednesday night show with Sharp Football's Rich Rebar, pick 6 on for DFS also, just to get an early look at the week. And that's the same stack he mentioned. And this is on Wednesday as well. He was already on top of it. He likes the over. He also said that exact double stack for Drew Lock, run it back with Julio, which is also a unique way to get to Julio. Having said that, I think if it came down to it and that starts getting quite popular, I prefer, this is not my unique stack, but I kind of like going back to Derek Carr because I think the Chargers-Raiders game is going well over. Derek Carr actually averaged 1.3 more yards per attempt against man, which is what the Chargers run more of. And so everyone's down on the Raiders offense because of last week's win debacle, but that's clearly not the case in San Diego. It's going to be amazing weather. They're not going to be able to stop Justin Herbert with the 23rd lowest pressure rate, the second to lowest adjusted sack rate. So yeah, I like that. I like that game in general. So if it came down to a cheaper option at quarterback, yes, for cash games, you probably would go Chase Daniel over these guys. But for tournaments, if it became Drew Lock, I would pivot and go to Derek Carr in that offense instead.
Yeah, what's so great about the Drew Lock call is, of course, we want to play Julio Jones. And if you're just only running Julio Jones by himself at 25% ownership, you're really starting to compete with a bunch of lineups. So I think that getting more correlation with those Julio Jones stacks, because we really want to play Julio Jones in general. And the big kicker here is getting a tight end involved in these stacks. That is such a big advantage because we are always just hunting for any tight end scores. And with Julio or with Travis Kelce priced way up, no George Kittle, I think that just picking the tight end in these stacks is going to be huge because most of these tight ends are going to bust. And if you're going to win a stack and your tight end goes off, you're in really good shape. And then the other thing, Daigle, real quick, my top fade is Josh Jacobs, who is...
Oh, did I skip past you? I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's totally fine. But I want to talk about fading Josh Jacobs and going to these Chargers stacks, because I'm with you. I think that this game does shoot out because Justin Herbert's playing so well. We've seen the type of offense completely change for the Chargers. I keep saying it. The neutral pass rate is way up. Justin Herbert, I see someone talking about Mike Williams. Philip Rivers couldn't throw the ball to Mike Williams downfield. Justin Herbert can. So I think that with more passes just in general coming, great option for Mike Williams. Obviously, Keenan Allen's one of the best price per dollar guys on the slate. And I think if I'm running it back with...
Give it to me.
Darren Waller.
Okay.
Darren Waller would just... I mean, he's the highest targeted guy on the team. We're talking about the Chargers defense who's still missing some pieces, and we're filling in that tight end spot most importantly. So I think that the fading Jacobs to go to Wallers is a pretty smart play.
I was asking for you to say Hunter Henry because I'm probably going to play a lot.
I like him too.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. What do you guys think about going double tight end in a lineup like that and playing, Herbert, probably just one of the wide receivers. So say Herbert, Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, and then using Darren Waller in the flex.
So Darren Waller would be the option. I mean, it's not a hot take, but Darren Waller would be the option I trust the most here in that stack because Bryan Edwards quietly practiced in full and will be back in this game. And as we know, Nelson Aguilar has been starting the last 4 weeks only because Bryan Edwards has been out. I don't think he comes back and usurps Aguilar, but it's enough to scare me off of Aguilar. Whereas at the beginning of the week, I actually liked him for a little bit for a flop lag in DFS. I wanted to play him everywhere. So rather than trusting these downfield targets that never hit to Henry Ruggs, since they don't use him anywhere else, I would probably play Darren Waller. But I also think Hunter Henry will definitely come in under-owned. And he's one of my favorite tight end plays, not just in season long, but on the entire board in DFS this week.
Yeah, I still don't think people have made the proper adjustments for the Chargers offense just because it's not the same offense that we saw in the first 4 weeks of the season. It's not the same offense we've seen the last 3 or 4 years. This is a vertical-based offense that passes a lot more than usual, and that's why I think Justin Herbert, even if he throws some interceptions, perfect. He's going to be balling out still.
That's definitely one of my favorite stacks. Quickly, just a random question here. Ball's Life also asked, Jared, I'll kick this one to you. Any thoughts on the Bears offense? Because I think they are actually in a good spot. I don't know. Actually, I do know. I wouldn't double stack them. 46.5 total. Like I said, I like it to go over, but even then, you're asking the over to compete with like 55 for the Seahawks and Bills, 53 for the Panthers Chiefs, which we haven't even touched on at all. And so I don't think it competes with that. I just like the bet in general. So I don't know. Like Allen Robinson, I think is a good play, but Anthony Miller, do you think that was a fluke last week?
I was going to bring up Allen Robinson when we were talking about those high-priced receivers. He's gonna be lower owned than all those guys. No one ever likes playing a receiver tied to Nick Foles. But, Robinson is top 4 in targets and air yards. Tennessee secondary is not good. So I think Robinson's a nice tournament play. Behind him, I'd still lean Darnell Mooney over Anthony Miller. Mooney is like right up there with Allen Robinson in air yards since Nick Foles took over. So I think Mooney is the higher upside play if you're looking to one of those cheap Bears wide receivers.
And that's what's good about tournaments this week as well, is that we're all trying to get to these receivers, but also the middle tier of guys are going to come in quietly. Terry McLaurin, 6,500. No one's talking about him off of a game where he had 52% target share from Kyle Allen. And now for the first time all year, they had like 14 days to actually work together, whereas Kyle Allen was just thrusted into the lineup. So I would imagine better rapport. I know we got a lot of Logan Thomas questions. I think Logan Thomas is a fine play, like especially at tight end. No one's going to want to play him, even though Kyle Allen, of course, 8 of his targets to Logan Thomas the past 2 weeks. 7 of his 8 targets have been deemed catchable by Pro Football Focus, which was clearly the issue from Dwayne Haskins the first month of the year. So yeah, this middle range of guys, even Will Fuller, are definitely going to come in under own. So that's something unique to think about for tournaments. Rather than having a pivot though, I do like the Chargers Raiders over and the stack for both sides quite a bit. I have a unique pivot and rather than a stack. And so I will say that I will have James Conner over Chase Edmonds in tournaments because he's only $100 more. And the Steelers are going to put their foots on the throats of the Cowboys, and it's not going to be pretty whatsoever. And I want all of those touches as Jalen Smith tries to strafe and catch up with James Conner, like the only running back who looks faster than Jalen Smith. So yeah, I like James Conner as a tournament pivot a lot this week.
Yeah, it's a great call.
Yeah, I love Conner. Kind Pittsburgh, big favorites. I think they're like 14-point favorites. They have one of the higher implied totals on the slate. Cowboys' run defense is horrible. My only concern with Connor is that he just doesn't play a lot in the fourth quarter, even the second half. If Pittsburgh has a big lead, it seems like Pittsburgh still wants to keep Connor at like some level of workload. Like he hasn't really gone over like 20 touches in many of these games. So I think that would be the issue in cash games. But tournaments, I mean, he is as good a bat as any running back besides Dalvin Cook probably for multiple touchdowns this week.
I like what about Cardinals passing attack and then going James Conner instead of Chase Edmonds as a little pivot play because they're the same price. They're going to be pretty similarly owned. I think Chase Edmonds probably 5 to 10% more owned. This is what I don't get about the James Robinson. I would rather have James Conner and Chase Edmonds over James Robinson. They're cheaper and they're coming in at roughly the same ownership. I don't really understand the James Robinson ownership right now. It doesn't make too much sense.
And Kyler Murray, I think, like I said, you have it over there. I think Kyler Murray is going to come in well under own off a bye week. A Dolphins defense that just shut out Jared Goff. And though I do think the Dolphins cover, like I think both teams can put up points. Like Tua was a 1-game sample. I don't care about that.
Yeah. Miami's pass defense is legit good, but I mean,
with Murray,
with Murray, you're really paying for the rushing production. So
totally.
I think it's fine. I like the pivot off of Edmonds to the passing game.
I know we had questions earlier because it's news that just came feeding in. I think in tournaments, I would probably fade Tony Pollard too. I need to think about it, so don't hold me to that. But at 4K at the minimum, I mean, well, no. I'm sorry. No, if Zeke is out, he's questionable, and they don't know. It's going to come down to what he feels like tomorrow after limited work today. But of course, everyone would then run to Tony Pollard. And Zeke has been bad, don't get me wrong, but the issue is that it's still not a great matchup. It's still a terrible offensive line, and it's still likely Garrett Gilbert under center. So I don't know what that gets you against the Steelers, honestly. I'd have to think about it a lot. I
think the opportunity cost is too much to waste a running back spot. They're projected for 14 points. I don't know.
And J.K. Dobbins is only 900 more. Like I don't look at it as the guy who's stone minimum. I look at J.K. Dobbins, who we know is going to get 16 plus touches and be amazing every week, is only 900 more, and he's going to go overlooked suddenly because everyone's going to want to pay down, whereas I'll just take that cost.
Yeah, I would fade Pollard in tournaments if Zeke is out. He would be an option for me in cash. I
think you have to play him, honestly, in cash.
Yeah, I mean, for that third running back spot for cash, like for me, it's DJ Dallas, Justin Jackson, or then Tony Pollard. And, Pollard's about $1,000 cheaper than those guys on DraftKings. So I probably would lean towards Pollard as the, third cash game running back.
Yeah, it's something we'll definitely have to look at and monitor tomorrow. But with that, Jared, any closing thoughts, anything we skipped over, any players you might like, players you might not like for the Week 9 slate?
No, I think we just about said it all. Play those Drew Lock stacks and, probably don't watch the game because it won't be pretty, but, he might have 25 DraftKings points by the end of it.
Hayden, what about you?
Last closing thought would be get in all the Chiefs guys still. Patrick Mahomes for MVP. That started last week. He's got some catching up to do with Russ, but look at his touchdown to interception ratio. The Chiefs are probably going to finish the year like 14-2. It's going to be a heated battle between Russ and Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes needs to catch up on these touchdowns with Russ, and the schedule opens up. I think Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, prayer that he plays, Nicole Hardman, DeMarcus Robinson. Pick your poison. But make sure you have a couple Patrick Mahomes lineups. I don't care what the price is.
Smola, thoughts on that game in general? Because we probably do need to talk about it since it's the second highest total of the week. And probably a lot of people want to play Clyde Edwards-Helaire is kind of where I would want to go, honestly, even though he pitched for Mahomes.
Yeah, how good do you think Carolina's pass D is? Because by a lot of metrics, they're like a top 5 pass D. I don't really buy it. I mean, it obviously doesn't matter with Patrick Mahomes, but I do think they're significantly worse against the run. So, we've seen the Chiefs lean run in some matchups this season. I think Edwards-Helaire is interesting in tournaments. I mean, the Le'Veon Bell thing, kills his cash game viability, but Carolina is still a top 5 matchup for opposing running backs.
Man, between Connor, Edwards-Helaire, Edmonds, like maybe I do come off Dalvin Cook in tournaments. That's such a donkey move, though. Okay, I'm gonna have to think about this.
Well, hold on real quick. With last week, Daigle, why I think you and I were on Patrick Mahomes last week. Look at the team totals. The Chiefs are projected for like 3 or 4 points more than any other team. That was the case last week.
Yep.
And I think people aren't understanding, like, when a quarterback is projected for like 32 real life points, I mean, you have to play those guys. That's when you get a ceiling. And I don't buy the Carolina defense being any good. They don't really have any studs at any three of the levels right now. I think maybe Brian Burns is a pretty solid player, but man, I think Patrick Mahomes is going to really start putting on some teams after a really tough schedule to open the year. They were breaking in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think they're really going to start figuring things out right now.
But then we get into inception, right? Because if we're already at the second level and everyone knows they have a high team total like last week, and so they're just going to double stack the Chiefs, don't you then pivot to the third level and go Edwards-Helaire to hopefully get the touchdown equity?
Hey, I would like to see
this is DFS, by the way.
Well, I would like to see this because last week Patrick Mahomes is at like 10%, and even like Travis Kelce, I was like, I mean, he was, in my opinion, the best, like projected for the most points. And I mean, you're not seeing these guys get as much ownership as possible. How many quarterbacks could get 40 DraftKings points? It's like 3 or 4 of them, and Patrick Mahomes is at the top of the list. So you want some exposure, even though you're paying a lot. I would rather punt my wide receiver 3 and lock in somebody that can get you like 40 points.
And remember, you're preaching to the choir. I won $1.10 last week, so I know all about that ROI with Mahomes. Anyways, that's our thoughts for the Week 9 slate. Smola, tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm over at Draft Sharks. You can find my cash game article there every week. I don't do a tournament article. We have someone else do that because, again, I'm not the best tournament player. I'm more of a cash game guy. And then you can follow me on Twitter at SmolaDS.
Hayden, what else do you have coming out this week? What about where we can find you?
First of all, I'd like to say on Mondays, go look at Jared's Twitter feed. I do that same with Daigle, I think, and then Adam Levitan. There's a couple guys that every single week, first thing I do is look to see what they posted after looking at usage, snaps, that type of thing. So definitely do that with Jared. You can find me at Hayden Winks. Right after this, like always, Daigle and I are going to go through the injury report, get some Roto World blurbs up. I'm going to add some things to my fantasy blueprint column, and then go on to building some lineups.
About to go drink some Manhattans too. So at NotJDaigle on Twitter. And then, of course, please go rate, review, and subscribe to the Roto World Football Podcast. Our preview show, Game by Game for Fantasy, is up now. And then we will be back same time, all of these channels, whatever you're watching, an hour to kick off on Sunday to answer your start-sit questions. So with that, hopefully we all commence together again the same time next week and talk about how we won more than $1.10. So until then, thank you all for joining. We'll see you next week.